This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Sea Fairies by L. Frank Baum. Chapter 9. The Bashful Octopus. It was a lovely day, and the sea was like azure under the rays of the sun. Over the flower beds and through the gardens they swam, emerging into the open sea in a direction opposite that taken by the visitors the day before. The party consisted of but four: Queen Aquareine, Princess Clia, Trot, and Cap'n Bill. People who live upon the land know only those sea creatures which they are able to catch in nets or upon hooks, or those which become disabled and are washed ashore, remarked the Queen, as they swam swiftly through the clear water. And those who sail in ships see only the creatures who chance to come to the surface. But in the deep ocean caverns are queer beings that no mortal has ever heard of or beheld, and some of these we are to visit. We shall also see some sea shrubs and flowering weeds, which are sure to delight you with their beauty. The sights really began before they had gone very far from the palace, and a school of butterfly fish, having gorgeous colors spattered over their broad wings, was first to delight the strangers. They swam just as butterflies fly, with a darting, jerky motion, and called a merry good morning to the mermaids as they passed. "These butterfly fish are remarkably active," said the princess, "and their quick motions protect them from their enemies. We like to meet them, they are always so gay and good-natured." "Why, so am I!" cried a sharp voice just beside them, and they all paused to discover what creature had spoken to them. "Take care," said Clia in a low voice. "It's an octopus." Trot looked eagerly around. A long brown arm stretched across their way in front, and another just behind them. But that did not worry her. The octopus himself came slowly sliding up to them and proved to be well worth looking at. He wore a red coat with brass buttons and a silk hat which was tipped over one ear. His eyes were somewhat dull and watery, and he had a mustache of long hair-like feelers that curled stiffly at the ends. When he tried to smile at them, he showed 2 rows of sharp white teeth. In spite of his red coat and yellow embroidered vest, his standing collar and carefully tied cravat, the legs of the octopus were bare, and Trot noticed he used some of his legs for arms, as in one of them was held a slender cane, and in another a handkerchief. "Well, well," said the octopus, "are you all dumb? Or don't you know enough to be civil when you meet a neighbor?" "We know how to be civil to our friends," replied Trot, who did not like the way he spoke. "Well, aren't we friends, then?" asked the octopus in an airy tone of voice. "I think not," said the little girl. "Octopuses are horrid creatures." "Octopi, if you please, octopi," said the monster with a laugh. "I don't see any pie that pleases me," replied Trot, beginning to get angry. "Octopus means one of us. 2 or more are called octopi," remarked the creature, as if correcting her speech. "I suppose a lot of you would be a whole bakery," she said scornfully. "Our name is Latin. It was given to us by learned scientists years ago," said the octopus. "That's true enough," agreed Cap'n Bill. "The learned scientists named every blame thing they come across, and generally they picked out names as nobody could understand or pronounce." "That isn't our fault, sir," said the octopus. "Indeed, it's pretty hard for us to go through life with such terrible names. Think of the poor little seahorse. He used to be a merry and cheerful fellow, but since they named him Hippocampus, he hasn't smiled once." "Let's go," said Trot. "I don't like to associate with octopuses." "Octopi," said the creature, again correcting her. "You're just as horrid whether you're pusses or pies," she declared. "Horrid!" cried the monster in a shocked tone of voice. "Not only horrid, but horrible," persisted the girl. "May I ask in what way?" he inquired, and it was easy to see he was offended. "Why, everybody knows that octopuses are just wicked and deceitful," she said. "Up on the earth where I live, they call the Standard Oil Company an octopus, and the Coal Trust an octopus, and—" "Stop! Stop!" cried the monster in a pleading voice. "Do Do you mean to tell me that the Earth people, whom I have always respected, compare me to the Standard Oil Company?" "Yes," said Trot positively. "That's what they do," added Cap'n Bill, nodding his grizzled head. "Oh, what a disgrace! What a deep, direful, dreadful disgrace!" moaned the Octopus, drooping his head in shame, and Trot could see great tears rolling down his cheeks. "This comes of having a bad name," said the Queen gently, for she was moved by the monster's grief. "It is unjust! It is cruel and unjust!" sobbed the creature mournfully. "Just because we have several long arms and take whatever we can reach, they accuse us of being oh, I cannot say it! It is too shameful, too humiliating!" "Come, let's go," said Trot again. So they left the poor octopus weeping and wiping his watery eyes with his handkerchief and swam on their way. "I'm not a bit sorry for him," remarked the child, "for his legs remind me of serpents." "So they do me," agreed Cap'n Bill. "But the octopi are not very bad," said the Princess, "and we get along with them much better than we do with their cousins, the sea devils." "Oh, are the sea devils their cousins?" asked Trot. "Yes, and they are the only creatures of the ocean which we greatly fear," replied Aquareine. "I hope we shall meet none today, for we are going near to the dismal caverns where they live." "What are the sea devils like, ma'am?" inquired Cap'n Bill a little uneasily. "Something like the octopus you just saw, only much larger and of a bright scarlet color striped with black," answered the Queen. "They are very fierce and terrible creatures, and nearly as much dreaded by the inhabitants of the ocean as is Zog, and nearly as powerful as King Anko himself." "Zog? Who is Zog?" questioned the girl. "I haven't heard of him before now." "We do not like to mention Zog's name," responded the Queen in a low voice. "He is the wicked genius of the sea and a magician of great power." "What's he like?" asked Cap'n Bill. "He is a dreadful creature, part fish, part man, part beast, and part serpent. Centuries ago they cast him off the earth into the sea, where he has caused much trouble. Once he waged a terrible war against King Anko, but the sea serpent finally conquered Zog and drove the magician into his castle, where he now stays shut up. For if ever Anko catches the monster outside of his enchanted castle, he will kill him, and Zog knows that very well." "Seems like you have your troubles down here just as we do on top the ground," remarked Cap'n Bill. "But I'm glad old Zog is shut up in his castle," added Trot. "Is it a sea castle like your own palaces?" "I cannot say, my dear, for the enchantment makes it invisible to all eyes but those of its inhabitants," replied Aquareine. "No one sees Zog now, and we scarcely ever hear of him. But all the sea people know he is here, someplace, and fear his power. Even in the old days, before Anko conquered him, Zog was the enemy of the mermaids, as he was of all the good and respectable sea folk. But do not worry about the magician, I beg of you, for he has not dared to do an evil deed in many years." "Oh, I'm not afraid," asserted Trot. "I'm glad of that," said the Queen. "Keep together, friends, and be careful not to separate, for here comes an army of sawfishes." Even as Aquareine spoke, they saw a swirl and commotion in the water ahead of them, while a sound like a muffled roar fell upon their ears. Then swiftly there dashed upon them a group of great fishes with long saws sticking out in front of their noses, armed with sharp-hooked teeth all set in a row. They were larger than the swordfishes and seemed more fierce and bold. But the mermaids and Trot and Cap'n Bill quietly awaited their attack, and instead of tearing them with their saws as they expected to do, the fishes were unable to touch them at all. They tried every possible way to get at their proposed victims, but the magic circle was all powerful and turned aside the ugly saws, so our friends were not disturbed at all. Seeing this, the sawfishes soon abandoned the attempt, and with growls and roars of disappointment swam away and were quickly out of sight. Trot had been a wee bit frightened during the attack, but now she laughed gleefully and told the Queen that it seemed very nice to be protected by fairy powers. The water grew a darker blue as they descended into its depths, farther and farther away from the rays of the sun. Trot was surprised to find she could see so plainly through the high wall of water above her, but the sun was able to shoot its beams straight down through the transparent sea, and they seemed to penetrate to every nook and crevice of the rocky bottom. In this deeper part of the ocean, some of the fishes had a phosphorescent light of their own, and these could be seen far ahead as if they were lanterns. The explorers met a school of Argonauts going up to the surface for a sail, and the child watched these strange creatures with much curiosity. The Argonauts live in shells, in which they are able to hide in case of danger from prowling wolf-fishes, but otherwise they crawl out and carry their shells like humps upon their backs. Then they spread their skinny sails above them and sail away under water till they come to the surface, where they float and let the currents of air carry them along the same as the currents of water had done before. Trot thought the Argonauts comical little creatures with their big eyes and sharp noses, and to her they looked like a fleet of tiny ships. It is said that men got their first idea of boats and of how to sail them from watching these little Argonauts. End of chapter 9. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Sea Fairies by L. Frank Baum. Chapter 10. The Undiscovered Island. In following the fleet of Argonauts, the four explorers had risen higher in the water and soon found they had wandered to an open space that seemed to Trot like the flat top of a high hill. The sands were covered with a growth of weeds so gorgeously colored that one who had never peered beneath the surface of the sea would scarcely believe they were not the product of a dye shop. Every known hue seemed represented in the delicate fern-like leaves that swayed softly to and fro as the current moved them. They were not set close together, these branches of magnificent hues, but were scattered sparsely over the sandy bottom of the sea, so that while from a distance they seemed thick, a nearer view found them spread out with ample spaces of sand between them. In these sandy spaces lay the real attractiveness of the place, for here were many of those wonders of the deep that have surprised and interested people of all ages. First were the starfishes, hundreds of them it seemed, lying sleepily on the bottom with their 5 or 6 points extended outward. They were of various colors, some rich and brilliant, others of dark brown hues. A few had wound their arms around the weeds, or were creeping slowly from one place to another, in the latter case turning their points downward and using them as legs. But most of them were lying motionless, and as Trot looked down upon them, she thought they resembled stars in the sky on a bright night, except that the blue of the heavens was here replaced by the white sand, and the twinkling diamond stars by the colored starfish. "We are near an island," said the Queen, "and that is why so many starfishes are here, as they love to keep close to shore. Also, the little seahorses love these weeds, and to me they are more interesting than the starfish." Trot now noticed the seahorses for the first time. They were quite small, merely 2 or 3 inches high, but had funny little heads that were shaped much like the head of a horse, and bright, intelligent eyes. They had no legs, though, for their bodies ended in tails, which they twined around the stems of seaweeds to support themselves and keep the currents from carrying them away. Trot bent down close to examine one of the queer little creatures and exclaimed, "Why, the seahorses haven't any fins or anything to swim with!" "Oh, yes, we have," replied the seahorse in a tiny but distinct voice. "These things on the side of my head are fins." "I thought they were ears," said the girl. "So they are, fins and ears at the same time," answered the little sea animal. "Also, there are small fins on our backs. Of course, we can't swim as the mermaids do, or even as swiftly as fishes, but we manage to get around, thank you." "Don't the fishes catch and eat you?" inquired Trot curiously. "Sometimes," admitted the seahorse, "and there are many other living things that have a way of destroying us. But here I am, as you see, over 6 weeks old, and during that time I have escaped every danger. That isn't so bad, is it?" "Phoo!" said a starfish lying near. "I'm over 3 months old. You're a mere baby, Seahorse." "I'm not!" cried the seahorse excitedly. "I'm full grown and may live to be as old as you are." "Not if I keep on living," said the starfish calmly, and Trot knew he was correct in his statement. The little girl now noticed several sea spiders creeping around and drew back because she did not think them very pretty. They were shaped not unlike the starfishes, but had slender legs and big heads with wicked-looking eyes sticking out of them. "Oh, I don't like those things," said Trot, coming closer to her companions. "You don't, eh?" said a big sea spider in a cross voice. "Why do you come around here, then, scaring away my dinner when you're not wanted?" "It isn't your ocean," replied Trot. "No, and it isn't yours," snapped the spider. "But as it's big enough for us both, I'd like you to go away." "So we will," said Aquareine gently, and at once she moved toward the surface of the water. Trot and Cap'n Bill followed with Clia, and the child asked, "What island are we near?" "It has no name," answered the Queen, "for it is not inhabited by man, nor has it ever yet been discovered by them. Perhaps you will be the first humans to see this island. But it is a barren, rocky place and only fit for seals and turtles." "Are any of them there now?" Cap'n Bill inquired. "I think so. We will see." Trot was astonished to find how near they were to the top of the ocean, for they had not ascended through the water very long when suddenly her head popped into the air and she gave a gasp of surprise to find herself looking at the clear sky for the first time since she had started upon this adventure by rowing into Giant's Cave. She floated comfortably in the water with her head and face just out of it and began to look around her. Cap'n Bill was at her side, and so were the two mermaids. The day was fair, and the surface of the sea, which stretched far away as the eye could reach, rippled under a gentle breeze. They had risen almost at the edge of a small rocky islet, high in the middle but gradually slanting down to the water. No trees or bushes or grass grew anywhere about. Only rocks, gray and bleak, were to be seen. Trot scarcely noticed this at first, however, for the island seemed covered with groups of forms, some still and some moving, which the old sailor promptly recognized as seals. Many were lying asleep or sunning themselves. Others crept awkwardly around, using their strong fins as legs or paddles, and caring little if they disturbed the slumbers of the others. Once in a while, one of those crowded out of place would give a loud and angry bark, which awakened others and set them to barking likewise. Baby seals were there in great numbers and were more active and playful than their elders. It was really wonderful how they could scramble around on the land, and Trot laughed more than once at their antics. At the edge of the water lay many huge turtles, some as big around as a wagon wheel and others much smaller in size. "The big ones are very old," said the Queen, seeing Trot's eyes fixed on the turtles. "How old?" asked the child. "Hundreds of years, I think. They live to a great age, for nothing can harm them when they withdraw their legs and heads into their thick shells. We use some of the turtles for food, but prefer the younger ones. Men also fish for turtles and eat them, but of course no men ever come to this out-of-the-way place in the ocean, so the inhabitants of this little island know they are perfectly safe." In the center of the island rose high cliffs, on top of which were to be seen great flocks of seagulls, some whirling in the air while others were perched upon the points of rock. "What do the birds find to eat?" asked Cap'n Bill. "They often feed upon seals which die of accident or old age, and they are expert fishermen," explained Queen Aquareine. "Curiously enough, the seals also feed upon these birds, which they are often able to catch in their strong jaws when the gulls venture too near. And then the seals frequently rob the nests of eggs, of which they are very fond." "I'd like a few gulls' eggs now," remarked a big seal that lay near them upon the shore. Trot had thought him sound asleep, but now he opened his eyes to blink lazily at the group in the water. "Good morning," said the Queen. "Aren't you Chief Muffruff?" "I am," answered the old seal. "And you are Aquareine, the Mermaid Queen. You see, I remember you, although you haven't been here for years. And isn't that Princess Clea? To be sure! But the other mermaids are strangers to me, especially the bald-headed one." "I'm not a mermaid," asserted Cap'n Bill. "I'm a sailor, just a visitin' the mermaids." "Our friends are earth dwellers," explained the Queen. "That's odd," said Muffruff. "I can't remember that any earth dwellers ever came this way before. I never travel far, you see, for I'm chief of this disorderly family of seals that live on this island. On it and off it, that is." "You're a poor chief," said a big turtle lying beside the seal. "If your people are disorderly, it is your own fault." Muffruff gave a chuckling laugh. Then, with a movement quick as lightning, he pushed his head under the shell of the turtle and gave it a sudden jerk. The huge turtle was tossed up on edge and then turned flat on its back, where its short legs struggled vainly to right its overturned body. "There!" snorted the seal contemptuously. "Perhaps you'll dare insult me again in the presence of visitors, you old mud wallower." Seeing the plight of the turtle, several young seals came laughingly waddling to the spot, and as they approached, the helpless creature drew in his legs and head and closed his two shells tightly together. The seals bumped against the turtle and gave it a push that sent it sliding down the beach like a toboggan, and a minute later it splashed into the water and sank out of sight. But that was just what the creature wanted. On shore, the upset turtle was quite helpless, but the mischievous seals saved him, for as soon as he touched the water, he was able to turn and right himself, which he promptly did. Then he raised his head above the water and asked, "Is it peace or war, Muffruff?" "Whichever you like," answered the seal indifferently. Perhaps the turtle was angry, for it ran on shore with remarkable swiftness, uttering a shrill cry as it advanced. At once all the other turtles awoke to life and with upraised heads joined their comrade in the rush for the seals. Most of Chief Muffruff's band scrambled hastily down the rocks and plunged into the water of the sea without waiting for the turtles to reach them, but the chief himself was slow in escaping. It may be he was ashamed to run while the mermaids were watching, but if this was so, he made a great mistake. The turtle snapped at his fins and tail and began biting round chunks out of them, so that Chief Muffruff screamed with pain and anger and floundered into the water as fast as he could go. The vengeful turtles were certainly the victors and now held undisputed possession of the island. Trot laughed joyously at the incident, not feeling a bit sorry for the old seal, who had foolishly begun the battle. Even the gentle queen smiled as she said, "These quarrels between the turtles and seals are very frequent, but they are soon ended. An hour from now, they will all be lying asleep together, just as we found them. But we will not wait for that. Let us go." She sank slowly beneath the water again, and the others followed after her. End of chapter 10. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Sea Fairies by L. Frank Baum. Chapter 11. Zog the Terrible and His Sea Devils. "The sun must be going under a cloud," said Trot, looking ahead. They had descended far into the ocean depths again, further, the girl thought, than they had ever been before. "No," the queen answered after a glance ahead of them. "That is a cuttlefish, and he is dyeing the sea around him with ink so that he can hide from us. Let us turn a little to the left, for we could see nothing at all in that inky water." Following her advice, they made a broad curve to the left, and at once the water began to darken in that direction, too. "Why, there's another of 'em," said Cap'n Bill, as the little party came to a sudden halt. "So there is," returned the queen, and Trot thought there was a little quiver of anxiety in her voice. "We must go far to the right to escape the ink." So they again started, this time almost at a right angle to their former course, and the little girl inquired, "How can the cuttlefish color the water so very black?" "They carry big sacks in front of them where they conceal the ink," Princess Clea answered. Whenever they choose, the cuttlefish are able to press out this ink, and it colors the water for a great space around them. The direction in which they were now swimming was taking them far out of their way. Aquareine did not wish to travel very far to the right, so when she thought they had gone far enough to escape the inky water, she turned to lead her party toward the left, the direction in which she did wish to go. At once, another cloud of ink stained the water and drove them to the right again. "Is anything wrong, ma'am?" asked Cap'n Bill, seeing a frown gather upon the queen's lovely face. "I hope not," she said, "but I must warn you that these cuttlefish are the servants of the terrible sea devils, and from the way they are acting, they seem determined to drive us toward the devil caves, which I wish to avoid." This admission on the part of their powerful protector, the fairy mermaid, sent a chill to the hearts of the earth people. Neither spoke for a time, but finally Cap'n Bill asked in a timid voice, "Hadn't we better go back, ma'am?" "Yes," decided Aquareine after a moment's thought. "I think it will be wise to retreat. The sea devils are evidently aware of our movements and wish to annoy us. For my part, I have no fear of them, but I do not care to have you meet such creatures." But when they turned around to abandon their journey, another inky cloud was to be seen behind them. They really had no choice but to swim in the only streak of clear water they could find, and the mermaids well knew this would lead them nearer and nearer to the caves of their enemies. But Aquareine led the way, moving very slowly, and the others followed her. In every other direction they were hemmed in by the black waters, and they did not dare to halt because the inky fluid crept swiftly up behind them and drove them on. The queen and the princess had now become silent and grave. They swam on either side of their guests as if to better protect them. "Don't look up," whispered Clea, pressing close to the little girl's side. "Why not?" asked Trot, and then she did exactly what she had been told not to do. She lifted her head and saw stretched over them a network of scrawny crimson arms, interlaced like the branches of trees in winter when the leaves have fallen and left them bare. Cap'n Bill gave a start and muttered, "Land sakes!" for he too had gazed upward and seen the crimson network of limbs. "Are these the sea devils?" asked the child, more curious than frightened. "Yes, dear," replied the queen, "but I advise you to pay no attention to them. Remember, they cannot touch us." In order to avoid the threatening arms overhead, which followed them as they swam, our friends kept near to the bottom of the sea, which was here thickly covered with rough and jagged rocks. The inky water had now been left far behind, but when Trot looked over her shoulder, she shuddered to find a great crimson monster following closely after them, with a dozen long snaky feelers stretched out as if to grab anyone that lagged behind. And there, at the side of Princess Clea, was another sea devil, leering silently with his cruel, bulging eyes at the pretty mermaid. Beside the queen swam still another of their enemies. Indeed, the sea devils had crept upon them and surrounded them everywhere except at the front, and Trot began to feel nervous and worried for the first time. Cap'n Bill kept mumbling queer words under his breath, for he had a way of talking to himself when anything upset him, as he would quaintly remark. Trot always knew he was disturbed or in trouble when he began to growl. The only way now open was straight ahead. They swam slowly, yet fast enough to keep a safe distance from the dreadful creature behind them. "I'm afraid they are driving us into a trap," whispered the queen softly. "But whatever happens, do not lose courage, Earth friends. Clea and I are here to protect you, and our fairy powers are sufficient to keep you from all harm." "Oh, I don't mind so very much," declared Trot calmly. "It's like the fairy adventures in storybooks, and I've often thought I'd like that kind of adventures, 'cause the story always turns out the right way." Cap'n Bill growled something just then, but the only words Trot could make out were, "Never lived to tell the tale." "Oh, pshaw, Cap'n," she said. "We may be in danger right enough, and to be honest, I don't like the looks of those sea devils at all. But I'm sure it's no killing matter, for we've got the fairy circles all around us." "Ha ha!" laughed the monster beside her. "We know all about the fairy circles, don't we, Mig?" "Ho ho!" laughed the monster on the other side. "We do, Slib, my boy, and we don't think much of fairy circles either." "They have foiled our enemies many a time," declared the princess with much dignity. "Ha ha!" laughed one. "That's why we're here now." "Ho ho!" laughed the other. "We've learned a trick or two, and we've got you fast this time." Then all the sea devils, those above and the one behind and the two on the sides, laughed all together, and their laughter was so horrible that it made even Trot shudder. But now the queen stopped short, and the others stopped with her. "I will go no farther," she said firmly, not caring if the creatures overheard her. "It is evident that these monsters are trying to drive us into some secret place, and it is well known that they are in league with Zog the Terrible, whom they serve because they are as wicked as he is. We must be somewhere near the hidden castle of Zog, so I prefer to stay here rather than be driven into some place far more dangerous. As for the sea devils, they are powerless to injure us in any way. Not one of the 1,000 arms about us can possibly touch our bodies." The only reply to this defiant speech was another burst of horrible laughter, and now there suddenly appeared before them still another of the monsters, which thus completely hemmed them in. Then the creatures began interlacing their long arms or feelers until they formed a perfect cage around the prisoners, not an opening being left that was large enough for one of them to escape through. The mermaids and the girl and the sailor man kept huddled close together, for although they might be walled in by the sea devils, their captors could not touch them because of the protecting magic circles. All at once Trot exclaimed, "Why, we must be moving!" This was startling news, but by watching the flow of the water past them, they saw that the little girl was right. The sea devils were swimming all together, and as the cage they were in moved forward, our friends were carried with it. Queen Aquareine had a stern look upon her beautiful face. Cap'n Bill guessed from this look that the mermaid was angry, for it seemed much like the look Trot's mother wore when they came home late to dinner. But however angry the queen might be, she was unable to help herself or her guests just now, or to escape from the guidance of the dreaded sea devils. The rest of the party had become sober and thoughtful, and in dignified silence they awaited the outcome of this strange adventure. End of chapter 11. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Sea Fairies by L. Frank Baum, Chapter 12, The Enchanted Island. All at once it grew dark around them. Neither Cap'n Bill nor Trot liked this gloom, for it made them nervous not to be able to see their enemies. "We must be near a sea cavern, if not within one," whispered Princess Clia, and even as she spoke, the network of scarlet arms parted before them, leaving an avenue for them to swim out of the cage. There was brighter water ahead, too, so the queen said without hesitation, "Come along, dear friends, but let us clasp hands and keep close together." They obeyed her commands and swam swiftly out of their prison and into the clear water before them, glad to put a distance between themselves and the loathsome sea devils. The monsters made no attempt to follow them, but they burst into a chorus of harsh laughter which warned our friends that they had not yet accomplished their escape. The four now found themselves in a broad rocky passage which was dimly lighted from some unknown source. The walls overhead, below them, and at the sides all glistened as if made of silver, and in places were set small statues of birds, beasts, and fishes, occupying niches in the walls and seemingly made from the same glistening material. The queen swam more slowly now that the sea devils had been left behind, and she looked exceedingly grave and thoughtful. "Have you ever been here before?" asked Trot. "No, dear," said the queen with a sigh. "And do you know where we are?" continued the girl. "I can guess," replied Aquareine. "There is only one place in all the sea where such a passage as that we are in could exist without my knowledge, and that is in the hidden dominions of Zog. If we are indeed in the power of that fearful magician, we must summon all our courage to resist him, or we are lost." Is Zog more powerful than the mermaids? Asked Trot anxiously. I do not know, for we have never before met to measure our strength, answered Aquareine. But if King Anko could defeat the magician, as he surely did, then I think I shall be able to do so. I wish I was sure of it, muttered Cap'n Bill. Absolute silence reigned in the silver passage. No fish were there, not even a sea flower grew to relieve the stern grandeur of this vast corridor. Trot began to be impressed with the fact that she was a good way from her home and mother, and she wondered if she would ever get back again to the white cottage on the cliff. Here she was at the bottom of the great ocean, swimming through a big tunnel that had an enchanted castle at one end and a group of horrible sea devils at the other. In spite of this thought, she was not very much afraid. Although two fairy mermaids were her companions, she relied, strange to say, more upon her tried and true friend Cap'n Bill than upon her newer acquaintances to see her safely out of her present troubles. Cap'n Bill himself did not feel very confident. "I don't care 2 cents what becomes of me," he told Princess Clia in a low voice, "but I am dreadful worried over our Trot. She's too sweet and too young to be made an end of in this here fashion." Clia smiled at the speech. "I'm sure you will find our little girl's end a good way off," she replied. "Trust to our powerful queen and be sure she will find some means for us all to escape uninjured." The light grew brighter as they advanced, until finally they perceived a magnificent archway just ahead of them. Aquareine hesitated a moment whether to go on or turn back, but there was no escaping the sea devils behind them, and she decided the best way out of their difficulties was to bravely face the unknown Zog and rely upon her fairy powers to prevent his doing any mischief to herself or her friends. So she led the way, and together they approached the archway and passed through it. They now found themselves in a vast cavern, so great in extent that the dome overhead looked like the sky when seen from the earth. In the center of this immense sea cavern rose the towers of a splendid castle, all built of coral inlaid with silver and having windows of clear glass. Surrounding the castle were beds of beautiful sea flowers, many being in full bloom, and these were laid out with great care in artistic designs. Goldfish and silverfish darted here and there among the foliage, and the whole scene was so pretty and peaceful that Trot began to doubt there was any danger lurking in such a lovely place. As they paused to look around them, a brilliantly colored gregfish approached and gazed at them curiously with his big saucer-like eyes. "So Zog has got you at last," he said in a pitying tone. "How foolish you were to swim into that part of the sea where he is powerful." "The sea devils made us," explained Clia. "Well, I'm sorry for you, I'm sure," remarked the Greg, and with a flash of his tail he disappeared among the sea foliage. "Let us go to the castle," said the queen in a determined voice. "We may as well boldly defy our fate as to wait until Zog seeks us out." So they swam to the entrance of the castle. The doors stood wide open, and the interior seemed as well lighted as the cavern itself, although none of them could discover from whence the light came. At each side of the entrance lay a fish such as they had never seen before. It was flat as a doormat and seemed to cling fast to the coral floor. Upon its back were quills like those of a porcupine, all pointed and sharp. From the center of the fish arose a head shaped like a round ball with a circle of piercing bead-like eyes set in it. These strange guardians of the entrance might be able to talk and to tell what their numerous eyes saw, yet they remained silent and watchful. Even Aquareine gazed upon them curiously, and she gave a little shudder as she did so. Inside the entrance was a domed hall with a flight of stairs leading to an upper balcony. Around the hall were several doorways hung with curtains made of woven seaweeds. Chairs and benches stood against the wall, and these astonished the visitors because neither stairs nor chairs seemed useful in a kingdom where every living thing was supposed to swim and have a fish's tail. In Queen Aquarine's palaces, benches for reclining were used, and stairs were wholly unnecessary. But in the palace of Zog, the furniture and fittings were much like those of a house upon earth, And, except that every space was here filled with water instead of air, Trot and Cap'n Bill might have imagined themselves in a handsome earthly castle. The little group paused half fearfully in the hall, yet so far there was surely nothing to be afraid of. They were wondering what to do next when the curtains of an archway were pushed aside and a boy entered. To Trot's astonishment, he had legs and walked upon them naturally and with perfect ease. He was a delicate, frail-looking little fellow, dressed in a black velvet suit with knee breeches. The bows at his throat and knees were of colored seaweeds, woven into broad ribbons. His hair was yellow and banged across his forehead. His eyes were large and dark, with a pleasant, merry sparkle in them. Around his neck he wore a high ruff, but in spite of this, Trot could see that below his plump cheeks were several scarlet-edged slits that looked like the gills of fishes, for they gently opened and closed as the boy breathed in the water by which he was surrounded. These gills did not greatly mar the lad's delicate beauty, and he spread out his arms and bowed low and gracefully in greeting. "Hello," said Trot. "Why, I'd like to," replied the boy with a laugh. "But being a mere slave, it isn't proper for me to hello. But it's good to see Earth people again, and I'm glad you're here." "We're not glad," observed the girl. "We're afraid." "You'll get over that," declared the boy smilingly. "People lose a lot of time being afraid. Once I was myself afraid, but I found it was no fun, so I gave it up." "Why were we brought here?" inquired Queen Aquareine gently. "I can't say, madam, being a mere slave," replied the boy. "But you have reminded me of my errand. I am sent to inform you that Zog the Forsaken, who hates all the world and is hated by all the world, commands your presence in his den." "Do you hate Zog too?" asked Trot. "Oh no," answered the boy. "People lose a lot of time in hating others, and there's no fun in it at all. Zog may be hateful, but I'm not going to waste time hating him. You may do so if you like." "You are a queer child," remarked the Mermaid Queen, looking at him attentively. "Will you tell us who you are?" "Once I was Prince Saco of Saccharino-La-Land, which is a sweet country but hard to pronounce," he answered. "But in this domain I have but one title and one name, and that is Slave." "How came you to be Zog's slave?" asked Clia. "The funniest adventure you ever heard of," asserted the boy with eager pride. "I sailed in a ship that went to pieces in a storm. All on board were drowned but me, and I came mighty near it, to tell the truth. I went down deep, deep into the sea, and at the bottom was Zog, watching the people drown. I tumbled on his head, and he grabbed and saved me, saying I would make a useful slave. By his magic power, he made me able to live under water as the fishes live, and he brought me to this castle and taught me to wait upon him as his other slaves do." "Isn't it a dreadful, lonely life?" asked Trot. "No, indeed," said Saco. "We haven't any time to be lonely, and the dreadful things Zog does are very exciting and amusing, I assure you. He keeps us guessing every minute, and that makes the life here interesting. Things were getting a bit slow an hour ago, but now that you are here, I'm in hopes we will all be kept busy and amused for some time." "Are there many others in the castle besides you and Zog?" asked Aquareine. "Dozens of us, perhaps hundreds. I've never counted them," said the boy. "But Zog is the only master. All the rest of us are in the same class, so there is no jealousy among the slaves." "What is Zog like?" Cap'n Bill questioned. At this, the boy laughed, and the laugh was full of mischief. "If I could tell you what Zog is like, it would take me a year," was the reply. "But I can't tell you. Everyone has a different idea of what he's like, and soon you will see him yourselves." "Are you fond of him?" asked Trot. "If I said yes, I'd get a good whipping," declared Saco. "I am commanded to hate Zog, and being a good servant, I try to obey. If anyone dared to like Zog, I am sure he'd be instantly fed to the turtles, so I advise you not to like him." "Oh, we won't," promised Trot. "But we're keeping the master waiting, and that is also a dangerous thing to do," continued the boy. "If we don't hurry up, Zog will begin to smile, and when he smiles, there is trouble brewing." The queen sighed. "Lead the way, Saco," she said. "We will follow." The boy bowed again and going to an archway, held aside the curtains for them. They first swam into a small anteroom, which led into a long corridor, at the end of which was another curtained arch. Through this Sacho also guided them, and now they found themselves in a cleverly constructed maze. Every few feet were twists and turns and sharp corners, and sometimes the passage would be wide and again so narrow that they could just squeeze through in single file. "Seems like we're gettin' further into the trap," growled Cap'n Bill. "We couldn't find our way out of here to save our lives." "Oh, yes, we could," replied Clia, who was just behind him. "Such a maze may indeed puzzle you, but the queen or I could lead you safely through it again, I assure you. Zog is not so clever as he thinks himself." The sailor, however, found the maze very bewildering, and so did Trot. Passages ran in every direction, crossing and recrossing, and it seemed wonderful that the boy Sacho knew just which way to go. But he never hesitated an instant. Trot looked carefully to see if there were any marks to guide him, but every wall was of plain polished marble, and every turning looked just like all the others. Suddenly, Sacho stopped short. They were now in a broader passage, but as they gathered around their conductor, they found further advance blocked. Solid walls faced them, and here the corridor seemed to end. "Enter!" cried a clear voice. "But we can't," protested Trot. "Swim straight ahead," whispered the boy in soft tones. "There is no real barrier before you. Your eyes are merely deceived by magic." "Ah, I understand," said Aquareine, nodding her pretty head. And then she took Mayre's hand and swam boldly forward, while Cap'n Bill followed holding the hand of Clia. And behold, the marble wall melted away before them, and they found themselves in a chamber more splendid than even the fairy mermaids had ever seen before. End of chapter 12.